The first thing the new government has to do on Brexit is to choose a chief Brexit negotiator. They then need to come here to Brussels and agree with the EU how often they're going to meet, what they're going to talk about, and in which order. The EU is very clear about its priorities. It says there'll be no talk about future trade relations until there's been progress in three key areas. Money. How much Britain owes the EU in outstanding financial commitments. People. The EU wants to pinpoint the exact rights of European citizens living in the UK and British citizens living in the EU after Brexit. And Ireland, how to avoid reintroducing a hard border between the Republic of Ireland, which is in the EU, and Northern Ireland, part of post-Brexit UK. Of course, Britain's new government will almost certainly have their own ideas about the choreography of Brexit talks. Whatever happens, they will be judged on the quality of the Brexit deal they get, not from the Brussels perspective, but in the eyes of British voters.
A pretty quiet day in the city behind me, and in fact in this election it's one where the voice of business has been strangely silent, and yet on some of the biggest issues, Brexit, immigration, regulation, taxation, these are issues that fundamentally affect the way business and the wider economy works, and yet some business leaders feel the politicians aren't speaking to or listening to them. The Conservative Party, for example, wants to intervene in energy markets. That's a departure for them. The Labour Party want to see a sharp rise in corporation tax. The Lib Dems would like the ability to reject any final Brexit deal. And parties in Northern Ireland are worried about what the imposition of a land border with the EU will do to people's working lives. In the past, most parties wanted to portray themselves as business friendly. But since the financial crisis and a series of big corporate scandals, that is much less true. Put simply, on regulation, on taxation, on immigration, what businesses want is predictability. But with Brexit negotiations just around the corner, that predictability is going to be very hard to deliver, whatever the election result. Another reason perhaps that business feels that no one's listening.
What people want from Brexit, of course, isn't what will make up every single member of the public's minds. But it's important because it's the main reason that Theresa May called this election. And it's important because both of the main parties have had to spell out what they would do and what they would seek to achieve as we enter the biggest change in our country for decades and decades. What's been difficult though for voters is that both Labour and the Tories are relatively reluctant to give us too many of the details. For the Lib Dems and the SNP, in contrast, they have been much more explicit about what they would like to see. But for the two main parties, it is probably the biggest issue of all. Theresa May thinks she's on safer ground with the public when she's talking about Brexit. She wants this to be a contest about who do you trust to do something difficult, who do you trust to get and secure a good deal for Britain against 27 other countries. But for the Labour Party, they know, and in the closing days of this campaign, they know they've had to say more about how Jeremy Corbyn would handle it. And their pitch to voters is they would put jobs first, people's livelihoods first, rather than what the Tories, they say, would seek to achieve.